Are you avoiding suffering? There are moments when you cannot name what you are feeling, but you know one thing very clearly: something inside does not feel light. Nothing big has happened, nothing is seriously wrong, and yet, there is a subtle heaviness, as if you are living your life without fully touching it. You still go to work, you still talk, you still reply to messages, you still smile at the right moments. From the outside, everything looks fine, but inside, there is a part of you that always wants to leave the present moment. Not leave life itself, but leave the feeling of actually being present in it. And you do not call this avoidance. You call it being busy, having to keep going, not having time to think too much. But if you slow down and look carefully, you will notice there are many moments in the day when you are not truly with yourself. The moment a slight discomfort appears, you immediately shift away to another conversation, another task, another thought, another screen, not because you are weak, but because you have become used to not staying long enough with what is happening inside you. Some feelings are very subtle, so subtle that you think they are not important, but because you do not look at them, do not stay with them, do not allow them to pass naturally, they do not end. And what does not end does not disappear, it only changes form. From a small discomfort into a subtle tension in the body, from a little worry into long-lasting fatigue, from a moment of emptiness into a feeling of not knowing what you are living for. You cannot clearly see where it begins, so you also cannot see how it slowly grows. There are days when you do not do much, yet you feel exhausted, not because the body is tired, but because the mind never truly stops. It keeps jumping to something else, thinking about something else, looking for another escape. And in all this movement, one important thing is forgotten. You never really stay with your emotions long enough to understand them. You may not have realized it, but much of avoidance does not happen in obvious ways. It is not about running away or rejecting. It is made of very small, very fast, very familiar actions. A slight sadness appears, and you reach for your phone. A bit of worry arises, and you start working. A feeling of emptiness shows up, and you fill it with noise. And you do this so often that you begin to believe you are solving the problem. But in truth, you are only avoiding staying long enough to understand what the feeling is trying to show you. There is a very gentle but deep truth. Emotions do not need you to fix them immediately. They need you to be present. When you are not present, they do not disappear. They remain in the background. And the more they are pushed down, the more energy it takes to hold them there. That is why the more you try to be okay, the more tired you can feel. Some sadness, if seen directly, dissolves on its own. Some worry, if you sit with it quietly, softens by itself. Some emptiness, if not immediately filled, naturally becomes stillness. But you rarely give them that chance. You want to escape quickly. You want to return to normal quickly. You want discomfort to disappear quickly. And it is this quickness that prevents you from ever truly moving through your emotions. It is like standing in a light rain. If you stay still, you see it is just rain. But if you keep running to avoid it, you get wetter, more tired, and feel like the rain never ends. Emotions are the same. They are not as frightening as the way you avoid them, but they feel heavier because you never stay long enough to see them change on their own. One subtle thing you may begin to notice: not every emotion requires action. Some emotions only need to be seen, to be accompanied, to be acknowledged. Oh, this is here. No story added, no judgment added, no meaning added, just that. But this is difficult, because the mind is used to reacting immediately, fixing immediately, escaping immediately. And this habit removes the gap between emotion and reaction. Without that gap, you cannot see avoidance, and without seeing avoidance, you believe this is just normal living. But beneath this normal, there is a quiet, continuous fatigue. It is like trying to keep everything from touching you, keeping work from stressing you, keeping people's words from hurting you, keeping the future from making you anxious. But life will always touch you. And when you do not allow yourself to be touched, you start to tense up, to hold, to resist. And that tension is what makes you tired. Not life, not emotions, but the way you keep standing outside your own experience. Perhaps what you are avoiding is not a big pain, but the ability to stay with small inner experiences, a bit of sadness, a bit of worry, a bit of emptiness, a bit of uncertainty, very ordinary things, but because you do not stay with them, they become a background weight in your mind. And slowly, you live with them without even noticing. You only feel not okay, without knowing why. Maybe the question is not, how do I stop suffering quickly? But, how many times have I left myself in a single day? Each time you turn away from a feeling, you lose an opportunity to understand it. No need to change it immediately. No need to solve it immediately. Just one moment of stopping. One moment of not running. One moment of staying long enough to see. This emotion is just a passing wave. Not you, not your entire life, just a moment passing through. And when you begin to see this, you may no longer need to avoid as much as before, because you realize what you feared most was simply something you had never stayed long enough to look at clearly. There is something very gentle, but if you look deeply, you will begin to see yourself differently. What you call avoidance is not something wrong. It is a natural response of the mind when it encounters something it does not want to feel. No one teaches you to avoid, but almost everyone does, in one way or another. You are not avoiding life. You are avoiding the feeling of life, and that is the key point. From a very ordinary perspective, life always contains everything: joy, sadness, ease, difficulty, comfort, surprise. Nothing stays still, but the human mind has a deep habit to hold on to what feels pleasant and push away what feels unpleasant. You do not like sadness, so you try to forget it. You do not like worry, so you shift your thoughts elsewhere. You do not like emptiness, so you fill it with something else. On the surface, this seems normal, but if you look deeper, this is the foundation of avoidance. Not avoidance of life itself, but avoidance of direct experience. In Buddhist understanding, emotion is not an enemy. It is simply energy arising in the mind. It appears when conditions are present, stays for a while, and then naturally dissolves. It is not fixed, not permanent, not you. But the problem is, you do not allow it to follow its natural process. You interfere too quickly. It is like standing in front of a wave. If you simply watch, you see it rise and fall. But if you try to push it away, or stop it from coming, you become caught in it longer. Emotion is the same. It is not strong because it exists. It feels strong because you do not allow space for it to exist naturally. You may think, if I don't fix this emotion quickly, it will get worse. But sometimes the truth is the opposite. The more urgently you try to fix, the more you try to escape, the longer it stays. A sadness, if seen directly, is just sadness, but if you avoid it, it becomes repeated thoughts. A worry, if held gently, is just a wave, but if you run from it, it becomes a long story in your head. And you begin to live inside the story, not the emotion itself. This is important. You do not live life directly. You live through the mind's interpretation of life, especially when there is no pause. Without pause, everything becomes reaction, and when everything is reaction, you stop seeing clearly. You only see, what do I do to make this go away? And that very urgency creates more suffering. Imagine a glass of muddy water. If you leave it still, the dirt settles, and the water becomes clear. But if you keep stirring it, trying to make it clear immediately, it only becomes more cloudy. Emotion works the same way. It needs stillness. But the mind keeps stirring, through thinking, worrying, analyzing, escaping, and you believe you are solving it, but you are actually making it less clear. In Buddhist teaching, seeing does not mean reacting. You can see an emotion without doing anything to it immediately. Just seeing, nothing added, nothing removed, nothing pushed away, nothing held. But this is difficult, because the mind is trained to act immediately. When sadness appears, right pointing arrow, fix it. When worry appears, right pointing arrow, fix it. When emptiness appears, right pointing arrow, fill it. There is almost no moment where you simply say, oh, this is what is here right now. Just that, nothing more. And yet, that simple moment is where freedom begins. Because when you stop reacting immediately, you begin to see more clearly. And when you see more clearly, you are no longer fully controlled by it. For example, when you notice, I am worried, there is already a small space. You are not fully the worry. You are aware of it. This space is very small. but it changes everything. It is like standing under a roof, watching the rain instead of standing inside it. The rain is still there, but you are no longer drenched in the same way. And maybe, what you are truly avoiding is not emotion itself, but silence, because in silence, there is nothing to hold on to. No noise, no distraction, and in that space, what you usually avoid begins to appear. So you reach for your phone. You turn on music. You find something to do, not because you like it, but because you are not used to simply being with yourself. But silence is not dangerous. It is just unfamiliar. In that space, suppressed emotions begin to surface, not to harm you, but to be seen. And when they are seen, they naturally dissolve, without force. You do not need to win against your emotions. You only need to stop fighting them, because most exhaustion does not come from emotions, but from resisting them. Like swimming against a current, the water does not exhaust you, the resistance does. And perhaps the deepest thing to see is not, what am I feeling? But, what am I doing with what I feel? Are you with it, or running from it? Are you seeing it, or turning it into a problem to fix immediately? Just seeing this is already a profound shift. And when you begin to understand yourself more deeply, you no longer need to run as much as before, because you realize what you feared was never as big as you thought. It only becomes big when you do not stay long enough to see it clearly. There are times when you don't realize you are avoiding suffering, not because suffering is not present, but because you have become so used to doing everything possible not to look at it directly. You get a little busier. You reach for your phone a little faster. You say, I'm fine, a little sooner. And life continues as usual. But that, usual, if you look closely, doesn't feel as light as you think. Maybe you have lived through days like that. Nothing major happens. Nothing falls apart. But inside, something feels unsettled. And instead of stopping to feel it, you choose to continue. Continue working. Continue talking. Continue thinking about something else, as if not stopping will make the feeling disappear on its own. But it doesn't disappear. It only moves slightly deeper, quieter, smaller, but still there, and you slowly learn to live with it without naming it. There is something strange about human beings. We can even get used to discomfort. So used to it that we no longer see it as a problem. Like a very soft background noise in daily life. Not loud, but continuous. It doesn't break your life, but it quietly takes away a sense of real ease. And then you begin to think, maybe everyone is like this. Maybe this is just how life is. A bit of pressure is normal. A bit of tiredness is normal. A bit of worry is normal. But if you pause long enough, a quieter question begins to appear. Or am I just using the word normal so I don't have to look deeper? In modern life, you are taught how to handle many things, but you are rarely taught how to stay with an uncomfortable feeling without running away. When suffering appears, you are told to overcome it, to be strong, to stay positive, to think differently, but very rarely does anyone tell you. Sometimes you can just sit with it, without doing anything at all. So you learn to avoid it. You avoid through work. You avoid through entertainment. You avoid through thinking. You avoid through trying to understand it quickly. And sometimes, you even avoid through positive words you tell yourself. But suffering doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. You may have noticed this. Unprocessed emotions often return, not in the same form, but in different shapes. A vague irritability, a small unexplained anger, a tiredness that sleep cannot fix, or simply a quiet emptiness you cannot name. You don't see the connection, but it is there. It is like putting things into a corner of a room and closing the door. You don't see them anymore, but they still take up space. And over time, the room becomes less open than before. The mind works the same way. Things you don't meet directly don't disappear. They wait. The important thing is this. You don't avoid suffering because you are weak. You avoid it because you are sensitive to it. You don't want to stay in that feeling. You want out immediately. And that very desire to escape creates many unconscious ways of avoiding it. Sometimes it is scrolling your phone. Sometimes it is eating something. Sometimes it is throwing yourself into work. Sometimes it is talking to someone, not to connect, but to avoid being alone with yourself. And if you look deeper, you may see something very honest. You are not afraid of suffering itself. You are afraid of staying still long enough to feel it fully. Because when you stay still, nothing is hidden anymore, nothing is scattered, and then you begin to see what you usually avoid. It could be an old sadness, an unspoken disappointment, a pressure you have carried for years without ever pausing to set it down. So you keep moving, constantly moving, in body, in mind, in thought, in action, as if movement itself could replace facing. But strangely, the more you move to avoid it, the more tired you become. Not because life is too heavy, but because you never truly rest. Some people say they are busy all the time, but often the busyness is not from life itself. It is from a mind that never allows itself to stop. You sit still, but your mind is elsewhere. You rest, but inside you are still calculating. You sleep, but even sleep is not fully peaceful. And slowly, you forget what it means to truly stop. You may ask yourself something very simple. If I do nothing right now, can I stay with myself? Not as an exercise, not to find the right answer, just to look directly at that feeling, the urge to escape, to move, to distract. That moment is where you begin to see how you avoid yourself. Not avoiding life, but avoiding the inner experience of life. And when you see this, even a little, you no longer look at suffering in the same way. Not to fight it, but to stop creating new layers of suffering just by trying to escape old ones. Maybe you don't need to change anything immediately. Just begin to notice. Notice how you react. Notice how you run. Notice how you avoid. Notice how you don't stay. Because when you see clearly, you are no longer completely carried away as before. And from that simple seeing, something new begins to appear. The ability to stay a little longer, to remain a little longer, not to run immediately, not to cover it immediately, not to fix it immediately. Just staying long enough to no longer be afraid of yourself. And that may be the very first small, but very real step toward no longer needing to escape suffering as you once did. There comes a moment in this journey when you no longer see suffering as something to avoid. You begin to see it closer, more real, no longer a distant concept, no longer something that only appears when life becomes too heavy, but as very small, very ordinary moments happening right here within you. Even right now, as you are reading these lines, there may still be a slight tension somewhere inside you. No clear reason, no need for a reason, just a subtle lack of ease. And in the past, you may have been used to ignoring it, brushing it away, or filling it with something else. But if you stay with it long enough, you begin to see it is not as strong as you thought. It is just a small wave, but because you keep reacting, it feels bigger than it is. And strangely enough, when you stop running, it begins to soften, not because it is erased, but because you are no longer feeding it with resistance. There are things in life that do not need you to defeat them, do not need you to erase them, do not need you to control them. They only need you to sit still long enough to see how they are unfolding. Suffering is like that too. It is not an enemy to be destroyed. It is a phenomenon happening within the mind, and when you look at it clearly, it loses much of its power. But this only happens when you are not in a hurry, not rushing to fix, not rushing to conclude, not rushing to return to the state of being okay, because that very rush is what keeps pulling you away from your real experience. You may notice something subtle. Every time an uncomfortable feeling appears, your first reaction is to get out of it. But if you try something different, just once, and do not immediately escape, you will notice a small space appearing between you and that feeling. Not a distant gap, but just enough space so you are not completely swallowed by it. In that space, you are no longer the feeling itself, nor are you someone fighting the feeling. You are simply the one who is seeing it. And this seeing is very important. Not immediately changing it, not fully understanding its cause, but simply being aware of what is happening, exactly as it is. You may realize something very light. Much of your tiredness does not come from what happens, but from how quickly you react to what happens. There is no pause, no breathing space. Everything moves too fast in the mind, leaving no place for you to stand still. And when you begin to create even a very small pause, things start to shift. Not because the world changes, but because the way you stand within the world changes. There may still be pressure, still problems, still things that do not go as you wish, but you are no longer pulled around as before. You are no longer fully identified with every emotion that arises. You begin to have a steadier place inside you, a quieter place, and from there, everything feels lighter, not because you have become numb, but because you are no longer completely consumed. There is a very simple truth that sometimes only becomes clear after a lot of exhaustion. You do not need to escape suffering in order to find peace. You only need to stop making it bigger within yourself. And when you stop making it bigger, it returns to its natural size, smaller, lighter, and something you can live with. In that moment, you understand something very quietly. Peace is not the absence of suffering, but the absence of fear when suffering appears. And that is the beginning of a different way of living. There are moments in life when you think you already understand many things. You have listened, read, reflected, and even nodded in agreement with deep ideas. But when you return to daily life, everything feels the same again. Still anxious, still tense, still tired, still something inside that does not feel light. And perhaps now you begin to realize something very subtle. It is not that you do not understand enough. It is that you have not paused long enough to truly see how your mind is operating. It is not that life has not changed, but the way you move through life has not yet changed. Have you ever asked yourself what within you makes even small things feel heavy? Not the events themselves, but the way they pass through your mind. A passing sentence, a brief glance, a small delay, yet inside you, it is no longer small. Maybe you are not only living in the present, but also carrying old emotional echoes that were never released. You can pause for a moment right now, not to find answers, just to observe, to notice if there is any subtle tension within you. No need to name it, no need to analyze it, just recognize that it is there. And if it is there, you do not need to rush to change it, just stay a little longer. There is a quiet truth many people overlook. We often think suffering comes from outside, from others, from circumstances, from things not going our way. But if you look more closely, you will see that the outside is only a gentle trigger. What makes it heavy is how it is held inside you. It is not others who hurt you most, but the way you continue to carry it in your mind. Not events that exhaust you, but how you replay them again and again. Not the future that frightens you, but the way you live it in your mind before it even arrives. Some things, if left to pass naturally, remain just a moment, but if you hold on to them, they become a story, and that story begins to live longer than the event itself. You may think you are solving problems, but sometimes you are simply repeating them in a different form inside your mind. And that is what makes you tired. One very important thing you may notice if you truly pause long enough is this. Much of your reaction does not come from the present moment, but from the habit of resisting the present moment, resisting discomfort, resisting imperfection, resisting lack of control. But life does not stay still for you to control it. It keeps flowing, and when you try to hold it, you become exhausted. It is like standing in a river trying to hold the water in your hands. Every attempt drains you, but the water keeps flowing anyway. Have you ever wondered what might happen if you stopped holding so tightly? Maybe not loss, but relief, not surrender, but simply stopping the act of making everything heavier. And this is not easy to see, because the mind is used to seeking safety through control. But the more you control, the tighter you become. The more you seek certainty, the more uncertain you feel. You cannot make life stop so you can feel safe, but you can learn not to grip it so tightly in each moment. And from there, something begins to change. You do not need to change your entire life at once. You only need to begin noticing how you are reacting to small things. When someone says something that irritates you, can you pause before reacting? When something does not go as expected, can you notice the tension before it becomes action? When a worried thought appears, can you see that it is just a thought, not the whole truth? Even this small shift is already a big change. Not changing the world, but changing how you stand within it. And then you begin to see that many things you once called big problems were only passing moments. They became heavy because you stayed with them too long, and stayed with resistance. You may have once believed that to end suffering, you must change your circumstances, achieve something, become different, or fix everything. But the more you move, the more you may realize something else. It is not that the outer world becomes perfect, but that your inner reactions change, so everything feels lighter. Some people live in the same conditions but suffer far less, not because life is easier, but because they no longer add weight to it inside. And that possibility is also within you, not something distant, but something very near. If you begin to truly see yourself, you do not need to become someone else. You only need to see more clearly how you are living. And when you see clearly, change happens naturally, without force. There is one final gentle truth you can carry, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. Suffering is not something you need to fight. It is something you need to understand clearly as it is being created within you. And when you see it clearly, you no longer need to defeat it. You simply stop making it bigger. And that alone is a very small but very real liberation. And if you have come this far, I want to say something simple to you. You do not need to do more. You do not need to try harder. You do not need to become someone else in order to suffer less. You can begin with a very small moment in your day. A moment of pause. A moment of slower breathing. A moment of noticing, oh, I am tense. That is all. You do not need to do it perfectly. You only need to return when you forget. And each time you return, you are stepping out of an old habit. The habit of being carried away without knowing you are being carried. If this touches you, you may share something you have realized about yourself. It does not need to be long. Just honest. Maybe your small truth will help someone else feel less alone. You may also leave a thought in the comments as a gentle way of looking inward. If this resonates with you, you can share it with someone who might need a pause, not to change them, but to give them a chance to see themselves more clearly. And if you wish to continue walking with reflections like this, you can subscribe, not to receive more information, but to occasionally be reminded to pause, breathe, and return inward. Even a small act of sharing can help. Let the teachings of the Tathagata spread, and the lamp of Dharma continue to shine. And finally, nothing is more important than this very moment you are living right now. If you are truly present here, perhaps you have already begun to see things are no longer the same as before. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.